I don't want anybody to miss any of this. Okay, tonight, the more we get into this and the more I watch everybody teach it, I realize how hard it is to cover all the material that we've assigned. So it's no less hard for me than it has been for all the people that's gone before me. So anyway, let's have a word of prayer and we'll start the class. Okay. Our Father, we're thankful that we have this opportunity to study your word. We pray that you'll be with us as we look at the life of David in particular, and help us, Father, to glean things from the lessons of David and how you dealt with men of old, and help us, Father, to learn that we might be better servants for you. Guide us in this study and help us to do your wills. Through Jesus we pray. Amen. Okay. So tonight we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 21 through 25. And I'm doing a couple things new here. I'm going to try to use this because we're going to have some maps. And so it may really get bad here, and I have to go back to the other one. And then the other thing is I just realized as I was going through this, I started copying all the scriptures down. And I thought, well, we'll read it all and then we'll comment on it. Well, I just realized, as everybody that's done this earlier, there's not enough time to do that. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to paraphrase it. So somebody tell me what a paraphrase is. What does para mean? Time saver, okay. Remember parables cast alongside? So I'm going to cast alongside the scriptures here. That's the definition of parable, is to cast alongside. So anyway, we're going to do that. Just to introduce it just a little bit, you know, I was talking with Pam about this, and I look at David, and I really admire David. And yet, you look at his life, and I don't think that anybody in the Bible has his life more just laying out in the open for everybody to look at, kind of like his entire life. And I mean, others have had it laid out in the open, but David, everything he does seems like good or bad. It's just kind of laid out there in book form, and we see David in all these different situations. And then the thing is you see David and you realize, hey, he's kind of like me. I make lots of mistakes. And he makes these mistakes, and they're all there for us to look at. And we wonder how in the world God could say, a man after my own heart. But then you see the other side of David, and you see this soft, this guy that he has a conscience. He does everything. He asks God about everything. And you really see a faith in God that goes really a long way. So anyway, just some interesting comments. So now, we will be, as I said, paraphrasing the whole thing. I invite you to follow along with the verses that we're going to cover here. And so we will start out by David flees to Nob after leaving Jonathan. Now, I have to back up just a little bit, and Kyle isn't here tonight, but last week he did a real good job. And we kind of found David in a situation where Saul was having the feast, and David, being his son-in-law, he wanted him to be at the feast, and David didn't show up. And finally, he showed up, and Saul let him know how much he appreciated him by trying to throw the axe and hit him. Wasn't that right? So in the feast, and David realizes, you know, this might not be a very good situation. So he has this situation where he makes a deal with Jonathan, and we talked a little about Jonathan, who is Saul's son. And Jonathan and David has a special relationship, and it appears that Jonathan might have been quite a bit older than David, and some have even suggested, Pam said this, that he might have been the sword bearer for Jonathan. David might have been the sword bearer for Jonathan. Is I saying that right? Anyway, yes. Okay, everybody, well, okay. Okay, there we go. Our heads work good. Now we just got to get the mouth to work. Okay. So anyway, very interesting. Well, he has now fled from that scene because Jonathan let him know they had this signal, and Jonathan let him know that, yes, Saul was trying to kill him, basically. So a nice feeling. So he has gone to this area let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, there it is, right up in here. And there's Nob right there. So you see Nob, and you kind of see the area outlined in red there. So anyway, and this blue over here is an inset of that map. And David first goes up to see Samuel, comes back down, and I think this feast takes place. And then that's when he goes down. Up and down in the Bible is kind of different, but it's down to Nob from Gibeah, which is where Saul is at this time. So right down, there's Gibeah right there, and he goes down here to Nob. So saying all that, let's go ahead, and we're just going to take these sections, and I'll just bring up the whole paraphrase of these sections, and we'll talk about it. So David flees to Nob after leaving Jonathan. Remember, Jonathan signaled him, and now he knows that Saul for sure is trying to kill him. And he finds Ahimelech, the priest. And Ahimelech fears David and asks why he had come to Nob. So you think there's a reason that Ahimelech might fear David? Well, okay. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Any other reason? I mean, David's a guy that, Saul had killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. So David is a warrior, and David knows how to fight. So I don't know, I can't say anything for sure about that. But yeah, we're going to talk about this in just a minute, what Rex has brought up here. So David lied, and he said the king had sent him on a secret mission to meet other servants of Saul, and he said, don't tell anybody. So anyway, this was a lie. It says it was a lie. And David asked Ahimelech for bread, and that is showbread. And the bread was not to be eaten by ordinary men, only men who had kept themselves from sexual relations and going through the cleansing period. And we find this law in Leviticus 15 and 18. And I found that it was about a 3-day period. And so David assured the priest that they had been traveling and that they had met this requirement. So David receives the bread now. So they go ahead and give him the bread. And all of this was witnessed by this Doeg. And this was Saul's servant. Now remember this guy, because he's going to come back up in just a little while. His name is Doeg. I think I'm pronouncing him right. If you want to correct me, that'd be fine too. So David asked Ahimelech for a spear and a sword. And guess what? David gets the sword of Goliath. So pretty interesting, isn't it? And apparently that's where the sword had gone of Goliath after David had killed him. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. So this again is now David flees to Gath, and this is going to be 21:10 through 15, if you're following there. So Gath is going to be right there, right in this area right here. And so he goes from Nob over here to Gath, and I think that would be about 15 to 20 miles. And we can look at these and we have to realize it's not great distances in what our society would be, but in their society it was a pretty great distance. I mean, 20 miles was quite a ways. So anyway,
it was also a descent, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely right. It would have been lower. So now David leaves Nob and flees to Gath, a city of the Philistines. Sounds strange, I know, and seems strange. So Achish served as king of the city. So maybe he thought that the Philistines would receive him since he was Saul's enemy. Now, we're kind of we don't know if that's true or not, whether they thought that or not. But however, they remembered Saul had slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. So this is actually kind of like a slogan that apparently had gone around and carried over even into the Philistine area. And this just attests to David being a great warrior. So David learned this and became scared. So he pretended to be insane. Another strange thing of David revealed here. And so he pretends to be insane, and he allowed spit to roll down his beard, down into his beard, and he made marks on the wall. So he was pretending to be crazy. And I guess we learn a little about David here because we know he had a beard now. So anyway, David was brought before King Achish. And when Achish saw him, saw him acting insane, he sent him away. So whether this was the providence of God or how this is how it worked out anyway. The king there, instead of trying to go ahead and cause harm to David, he just sends him away. He says, this guy's crazy. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to see that David is going to go to the cave of Adullam. And anyway, again, this is going to be down here where the red box is, right in this area right here. And when I was in Israel, you might remember this better than me, Oliver, but we went down in this area. It's been right pretty close the way I figured is in this area right here. And we went into this what we call the pigeon condo down there. It was a cave, and it would have been within a few miles of this area. And I don't try to say it was that cave, but it had been real close. And believe it enough, I remember it was pretty conspicuous where the mouth of that cave was, but it was big down inside. So I just say this because there were caves all around there, and we were in a cave right into this area, and it had a great big room down there, and they had pigeon condos there, and it's just an interesting cave to go in. So anyway, this was David at the cave there, and David's family joins him there, his brothers and all of his father's household. So anyway, can anybody think of any reason why they might have joined David here? Think about it. If you were in Russia and you started fighting with Putin and you got out of Dodge, got out of Russia, would you worry a little bit about your family maybe? And would the family be trying to get out as well? Seeing how things work in the country of Russia, the person that spoke evil against Mr. Putin might find themselves, their families in danger even back in the country after they had left. Just a thought, that's all I'm saying. So there's these misfits and malcontents also join them. And this sounds a little strange, and maybe if you're reading along, I think it says those in debt, some of the translations. But anyway, this is the people that's gathered around David now. And David became their leader, and there was about 400 men that came to David's outlaw band. And David sends his parents to Moab, and we'll look at that in a minute. And David brings his parents to Mizpah of Moab for their safety, and asks King of Moab to let them stay until David understands what God will do with him. So David relocated to the forest of Hereth. So let's go ahead and go to right down in this area. Right here is Mizpah, and this is Moab right here. And David has come from up in this area, and this would be probably 30 miles down through here, I expect, or a little bit better. And he's brought his parents and his close family there, and the king there has agreed to take care of them, and they can be safe there. So now we have a long section here. Saul slays the priest of Nob, and we've got to keep going. So this is a long section, and it's very interesting. But Saul slays the priest at Nob. So remember now, Nob is where David had fled to, and there it was he met Ahimelech the priest. So Saul was convinced David was leading a conspiracy to overthrow him. And, you know, we kind of study Saul a little bit, and you see his mind is not working real well, or at least maybe to be, I don't know how, maybe he was just mean. I think that's true, but to me, I just think the guy was just scared. He was scared. He saw people having had a conspiracy against him, and we see leaders in the nations today, and even our own nation, when sometimes they get scared even when they shouldn't be. So Saul was dwelling in Gibeah when he heard David had been found. Does anybody remember anything about the city of Gibeah back in Judges? Anybody? Once, twice? What about the Levite's concubine? It was in the town of Gibeah that this horrible thing took place. So Gibeah wasn't too far out of Jerusalem there. It's maybe 10, 15 miles. I don't know. But anyway, Saul is dwelling in Gibeah and heard that David had been found. So he asked for help from the tribe of Benjamin to destroy David. And so anyway, he appealed to them and said, I will give you fields and vineyards. He's wanting information. And this sounds kind of political, doesn't it? Like today, you know, hey, you help me and, with this election, and guess what? You know, we got some big bills coming up, and we'll see that some of that money gets sent your way. And, you know, if you need a bridge built to nowhere, well, we'll get you some money for it there. And it just sounds kind of like a political plot idea to me. And then he said to his own men, and then he said that his own men might be part of the conspiracy to overthrow him. He's kind of getting the deck stacked just right. So there might be some guys come in here and they say, give you some false information there. And he mentions even his son Jonathan had made a league or had made a covenant with David, which is probably pretty concerning to Saul. And you should feel sorry for me and help me destroy David. Again, this political thing, the way I look at it. So Doeg the Edomite speaks up. And he rats on Ahimelech. So you remember this guy? He was looking as Ahimelech was helping David and giving him this sword and giving him food and as it says here, a divine guidance. And so Saul calls for Ahimelech and charged him with conspiracy with David. And it's hard to say how Ahimelech looked at this. When David went there, you remember, he was scared and probably didn't want to get involved, and now he finds he is involved. So anyway, Ahimelech apparently did not realize how serious this situation was, and he praised David, thinking that even called him the king's son-in-law. And was this true? Yes, it was true. He was a king's son-in-law. So Ahimelech was trying to say, look, David's a good guy, and he's even your son-in-law, and I recognize him as that, Saul. Then Ahimelech, it appears that after he realizes the seriousness of the situation, he goes ahead and says, I don't know anything about all this whole affair. He's kind of trying to get his way worked out of it. So Saul, in his good condition, pronounced Ahimelech guilty and ordered him to be killed, but the soldiers did not want to kill him because he was a high priest, which is honorable. I mean, it's the way it should be. So guess what? So Saul ordered Doeg to kill him. So remember, this Doeg there, the guy that had witnessed all this, he seems to be the guy that he's going to hold up the banner and say, I'll do it. So,
Why would he care? He's not a Jew.
Pardon?
He's not a Jew. Why would he care if
Yeah, I guess that's right. A good point. Yeah. So, well, and he doesn't, because he was very much obliged to kill Ahimelech and also 85 other priests who were at Nob. Only Abiathar escaped. Abiathar escaped. Only one escaped, and we'll hear his name a little later on here. He also wiped out the whole town of Nob. So this guy, he says, all right, you give me the chance to kill him, and I'll take care of him. And I guess he was not a Jew. So Edomite, okay. So he had all the more incentive to just take care of him, and he told David or Saul, I'll take care of it for you. So Abiathar escapes to David and tells him what had happened. And did somebody else say something? Yeah. So David felt responsible for Saul's vengeance. And again, we get a picture of David now. We get a lot of pictures of David. And David has a conscience. And now he's feeling responsible for all of this. So David told Abiathar to dwell with him and he would protect him. So we have one of Ahimelech's sons that was a priest that actually escaped. So they pretty well took care of that situation. So now David delivers Keilah. And this, again, is going to be down in here. So let me see if I can get this thing to work here. Okay, here's the red box here. And here's Keilah right in here. And remember, he was up here at Gath. So he comes down here to Keilah, and he's going to dwell here. And we'll find some information out about him as he goes down into this area. So then this is the reading here, and again, there's no way we could read it, so we're going to go ahead with our paraphrasing here. So David delivers Keilah from the Philistine oppression. And here's the situation that was going on there. The Philistines were raiding the threshing floors during the threshing season and fighting against Keilah. And they were looting the farmer's harvest. So if you think fall is the harvest time here in this nation, and if you go back to the Midwest, we were back there last month, and it's at this time that the farmers are all out there, they're harvesting their crops, and where I'm from, it's corn and beans, soybeans, and they're bringing it all in, and you have to realize that they've invested this whole year in putting in these crops, taking the effort to put them in, all the costs involved for seed and fertilizers and everything, and now they're just now harvesting it with their machines, and someone comes along with the AK-47 and say, I want your crop. And so this is basically what's happening here. They're stealing the crops after the people of Keilah have already put all the work in, and now they're taking it, and of course that devastates them. Yeah. So David inquired, they were looting the farmer's harvest, and David inquired of the Lord whether or not he should deliver him. And the Lord instructed him to go, and David's men were not eager to go. And they reasoned that they already had Saul's army trying to destroy them, so why would they want to go antagonize the Philistines even more? So David asked the Lord a second time, and the Lord again said, go and defend Keilah, and he promised him victory. And David obeyed the Lord and delivered Keilah, and Abiathar joined David at Keilah and brought his ephod with him. Aha. Okay, another question. What's an ephod? The vest, okay. A vest or an apron that the priests wore. And as we studied that a month or two or three ago, we remembered it had certain things on it, and it was sewn in certain ways and made in a certain way. So anyway, so he joins, and Saul heard David was at Keilah, and he reasoned that he could capture David by raiding this town. And he called all of Israel together for war, and David inquired of the Lord through Abiathar if Keilah would hand him over to King Saul to avoid being destroyed. Does this kind of sound like Nob, and what happened at Nob? Well, they remember Nob. And so anyway, here these folks at Keilah, they knew what happened to Nob, and now David is concerned, and he's asking this high priest, he said, will they turn me in because they're scared of Saul? And probably, yes. Rex is saying yes. So they had good reason to be scared because Saul was very, very unpredictable, and he didn't mind tearing things up, let's say. So the Lord told David to flee, and David and his 600 men left Keilah, avoiding Saul's attempt to capture him. So David wandered from place to place in the wilderness stronghold of Zeph. I'll show you that on the map. None of these places are too far. And Saul brought with him Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver David into Saul's hands. So there's one thing we understand here. God was taking care of David. And apparently David's faith let him know that God would take care of him, and he turned to God and asked him for help. So anyway, we can't read that, so we'll go ahead to the paraphrase. Jonathan hears that David is in Horesh, or the wood, or as we say today, the woods. And he went to see David and strengthen him. So remember, these two guys, Jonathan, Saul's son, had this great bond. And it says he loved David, and they cared for one another. And we don't know this again. It makes sense to me that he was probably older, and David might have been his sword bearer, I think is what it says. And they told David God would protect, and he told David that God would protect him and bring him to the throne of Israel. So you see, Jonathan, who would normally be in line, the bloodline after Saul, for the throne, is now realized that the throne has been promised by Samuel to David. Remember how David had been anointed. Saul was still the king. David didn't get the kingship right away. But the son of Saul, Jonathan, realized that God had made this determination, and it's already in the works, and David was going to be the king. So David and Jonathan renewed their covenant. And while David was in the wilderness of Zeph and his men in Gibeah, and the men of Gibeah reported his location to Saul. Nice guys, huh? So Saul blessed the men of Gibeah for helping him and asked them to pinpoint the exact location of David. And then David fled to the wilderness of Maon, south of Jezreel, and Saul followed him there. So Saul's hot after him. And Saul was closing in on David on each side of the mountain. And when Saul got word of the Philistine invasion, and I put the providence of God here because I think this is what happened. So here's what happens. Saul gets the word that, hey, back at home on the home front, the Philistines are coming in and they're invading back there. You're out of town. So Saul left off pursuing David and responded to the invasion. And the name of the place was, do you have that name down there, Steve? No? I thought you'd pronounce it. Shilaha Mahalakaluk. Yeah. Rock of Escape. This is the Hebrew name, is the way I understand it. So anyway, Rock of Escape. So he was kind of surrounded on each side of this mountain. And Saul gets the call, and he really has David surrounded. Saul gets a call, he leaves and heads out to back up to where he has to take care of things up at the home front. So David leads the wilderness of Zeph and moved to the strongholds of En-Gedi on the west shore of the Dead Sea. So again, let's look at it right here. Okay, we got to keep moving. So anyway, here's Zeph, And here's his wilderness around. This will come up. But this is all kind of wilderness area around here. But David moves over here to the west bank to En-Gedi. Now, En-Gedi is a place that I visited, Oliver and I visited, and Cindy was in En-Gedi. And if you're right on the shore of the Dead Sea, En-Gedi is kind of off to the side, on the west side, and it's a great big high bluff. It's just like, and there's a place that we went in, and I don't think Cindy said they didn't go up in there, but we stopped and we went up in there, and it's just like, it's almost like a park or something. It's got this spring that's coming down just out of all this dry land, and there's a waterfall there and all the spray, and it's very green, and there's animals all over the place, and it's just like, wow, this is like a zoo or almost. And you look up on the hills up there, high up on the bluff, and there's these caves. So am I explaining it right, Oliver? Did I miss anything? Okay, well, I should. Anyway, it was just an interesting place, and I don't, our guide said this is very possibly where David was hiding. We don't know. Anyway, we have to move on. So this is the text here, and so we know this story pretty well. So I got to go through it pretty fast here before we run out of time. So Saul was successful against the Philistines, and Saul returned to pursue David, following him to En-Gedi. So Saul goes up, he takes care of things on the home front, and now he's coming back, and he just can't get David out of his mind. So here he is. Saul brought with him 3,000 men, and he's going to go down and chase David some more. And I tell you, you just think about David. This guy's chasing him, trying to kill him, and I don't know, how did he live? It's hard. And David and his men hid in one of the caves near the sheepfold in the region. And I can't quite picture this in my mind because where we saw was on a big bluff. But apparently up above there was grazing for sheep, and the sheep were up there. That's the only thing I can explain. So Saul entered the cave to cover his feet and to go to the bathroom. Okay. And David's men wanted David to slay Saul, saying that God had delivered his enemy into his hands. Now here's David, who's a man of war, and shedding blood is something that he's familiar with. And so anyway, here is David with this great opportunity. And so David went to Saul and cut off a portion of his garment. And afterwards, David's conscience bothered him, and David said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth my hand against him, and seeing that he is anointed of the Lord." So again, shows you a little something about David and his respect for God and for God's anointed, appointed or anointed man that he had there for the king. So David would not let his men kill Saul. And after Saul left the cave, following him, and after Saul left the cave, David followed him and bowed before him and said, "David seeketh thy hurt." In other words, I was going to kill you, Saul. And David said to Saul that he had the opportunity to kill him, but he did not, and he revealed this material that he'd cut off of his robe. So possibly Saul had left the robe and laying there while he was doing other things, and David cut a portion of the robe off, and now David repeated to Saul that he could not harm him because he was the Lord's anointed. And the Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. He assured Saul he wasn't going to kill him. And let's see, that David did not kill Saul proved that he was not the wicked man Saul's advisor said he was. So Saul's heart was pricked here. Somehow David had gotten to Saul. So Saul's heart was pricked by David's words, and he said to David, "Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. So Saul perceived that David was not his enemy, since he did not kill him. And it's too bad that Saul couldn't have kept this thinking, but Saul's disposition, whether he was a madman in some position, he could hold it for a while. So Saul said he knew David would be king, and the kingdom would be established in his hand. And Saul said it, and he knew it deep down, but he had a terrible time accepting it. Saul asked David to make a covenant not to destroy his seed after he had become king. Now this is the way many of the people that took over a kingdom, if you remember right, it's kind of push come to shove, and whoever winds up on top, they take over the kingdom. So to assure that none of the former king's family is going to come in and try to take care of anything or get back in, they killed everybody. So Saul just wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to be the situation with David there, that he wouldn't come back and kill all of his ancestors, Saul's family. And David agreed to the covenant. And Saul went back home, and David left the position where he was hiding. Okay, the death of Samuel, this covers one verse, 25:1. And so it was at this time that Samuel died, and all of Israel mourned his death. And he was buried at his home, and perhaps in a garden beside his home, they say a home. And David left En-gedi and went to the wilderness of Paran. And do I have a, yes. So very briefly, it's down in here, and this is right here. The wilderness of Paran, I think, is this right in here. It's hard to read there. So anyway, this is En-gedi. He went down in here, and that's where he was residing at this time. So this brings a story that we're all very familiar with, and we'll finish out with this in verse 20, in chapter 25. So, did I do that right? So, in the wilderness of Paran, or the other name is this Meron, and in the area of Carmel, and that was all on that map there, is where Nabal, a very rich man, had his sheep. And he was also an evil man. So his wealth included 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He had great wealth. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that would even be a big flock of sheep for nowadays. And to go ahead and add 1,000 goats to it, wow. So he was a rich man, and he had married a woman named Abigail, and a woman of understanding and very intelligent, and she was also very beautiful. So this was quite a lady. Excuse me. And it was in the springtime, which was a time of shearing. So this might be important for what David was asking here. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. David heard that Nabal was shearing the sheep, and he sent 10 men to request a gift to sustain David and his men. And David and his 600 men had provided a wall of protection for Nabal's servants and his sheep. So David had provided protection. And protection from who? There we go. The Philistines, of course. This bunch over there of rebels, the Philistines, they'd also were given this Keilah a terrible time, and here this rich man is out there, and David has provided him protection as well. So, and I told you, the reason David would go at this time is you're shearing the sheep, and I would assume after you shear the sheep, if you were going to butcher them, this would be the time to butcher them, because they wouldn't have the whole mob of wool on them. So the servants presented the request to Nabal, and Nabal refused to request and spoke disdainfully of them, saying, "Who is David?" So apparently this guy was speaking about the wrong man. David's men returned and reported to David what Nabal had said. So this, again, you see David in a different position. So different disposition, I should say. So here's David. He's a man that knows how to take care of the situation of your enemies. So David armed 400 men to execute vengeance against Nabal. And he left 200 to protect the camp, and he started to march his march against Nabal. And one of Nabal's servants reported to Abigail what had happened, and the servants told her how Nabal had railed on them. So now, we don't have any, I didn't even copy down the scriptures here because I knew we didn't have time. So Abigail quickly prepares the gifts she had sent, that she had sent to David. Abigail quickly prepared gifts that she sent to David. And she didn't tell her husband what she was doing. She sent gifts ahead and followed afterwards to meet David. And when she met David, he told her his intention to avenge himself of this sinful conduct of Nabal and to determine not to leave anyone alive of his household. And that would have included Abigail as well. So Abigail bowed down before David and spoke to him about the evil which had occurred. And she said, "Lay the evil deed on her," and appealed for David to reconsider his actions. She said, "Let me take the blame for this." And so she explains that she understood her husband was a fool, and Nabal means fool. And she said her coming to David was to restrain him from shedding blood by avenging himself. In other words, this is going to be bad for David if you come and kill a lot of innocent people. She said that she had faith that David would fulfill his promise to make a sure house of David, that the Lord would fulfill his promise to make a sure house of David. And I would understand what she's saying is, I understand that you've been anointed and you are going to be the king, and the Lord has anointed you. She also reminded David that he had fought the battles of the Lord, both on Saul as Saul's captain, and had delivered Keilah, which was that town that, earlier he defended. And she also reminded David that the Lord would protect him from harm and avenge him of his enemies. And when the Lord's promises to David were fulfilled, he would not look back on this and regret what he had done to Nabal and his household. She said, "I don't want you to look back and regret this." So with these words, Abigail restrained David from avenging himself, and he realized, and David could see Abigail's wisdom, blessed her for restraining him. He realized that she was the Lord's instrument to restrain him from committing sin. And David sent her away in peace, and Abigail returned home and finds Nabal participating in a drunken feast. She didn't tell him anything until the next day when he had sobered up. That's the terms we'd use today. And when Nabal heard what Abigail had done, his heart died within him. I mean, this guy fell to the knees and realized how terrible a thing had happened there. So anyway, his heart died within him, and he became a stone. I mean, he just froze like a dead man. And then 10 days later, he was a dead man. The Lord struck him, so he died. So now we go to David marries Abigail. I got 2 minutes. David heard that Nabal was dead, so he sent a word to Abigail. "Blessed be the Lord who has pledged the cause of the shame inflicted on me by the hand of Nabal, and he has kept back his servant from evil. And the Lord also retained the evil. Then the Lord also returned the evil doing of Nabal on his own head." In other words, Nabal had it turned back on his own head. And David sent a proposal to Abigail to take her as a wife, and she accepted the proposal. So she left Nabal's dwelling with 5 damsels and expressed her willingness to be a humble servant of David. And Abigail got up quickly and rode a donkey with her 5 female attendants who accompanied her, and she followed the messengers of David and became David's wife. So you think about this now. This lady was quite a lady, and not only was she quite a lady, but she was, shall I say, high class. I mean, she had 5 servants. She rode on a donkey, which probably wasn't the normal way of traveling for the poorer people of that day. And she comes in, but she says, "I'll be your wife." So, anyway, and there goes Rick, and he's going to ring the bell. So, and I think I'm going to make it here. Anyway, it's quite a story. And of course, now I want to just say something about here. David had also taken a hen ram of Jezreel, and they both became his wives. So this Henoram and Abigail became the wives of David, 2 wives. But Saul had taken his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltai, the son of Lahish, who was from Gilom. So Saul had taken David's wife that he had given David, his daughter, that he'd given David for wife, and he'd given her away, and now she'd become another man's wife. 1 minute over, pretty good, huh? Okay, so very interesting. Isn't David, I mean, I like to look at David and think, wow, everything David did was so good. He wrote all the Psalms. He was such a wonderful man. And yet we open the book up and we see he'd done all these things. And it tells me personally, I just think personally, that God loved him. So all the stupid things that I've done in my life, and I got to look back and think, I guess maybe God will forgive me of the stupid things I've done.
David had a few of those too.
Pardon?
Stupid things.
Yes, he did. And God forgave him.
Don't we all?
Yes, don't we all? Okay, any comments? Isn't that a great, I tell you, it's great studying David's life. Okay, next week, we'll pick it up there.